and those that are with us virtually. This is it's a substantial, complex conversation. Not that tonight specifically is, which I hope it gets there, quite frankly. Part and parcel of, so some of the myths that are out there, and we all know that we bring ourselves to whatever it is that we're looking at. And whatever the narrative is that's behind that, I'm hoping tonight we're able to penetrate some of the filter, if you will, so that it's not just looking for what that narrative is, right? We live in the world of sound bites, and we live in the world of, I think this is what's happening, so this is a fact. Where we are financially, there's a multitude of, starting with the structural piece. The structure that has been utilized from a budgetary perspective and a financial perspective throughout Broomfield's history is that the budget has been based on expenses. So whatever it is you spend, we find the dollars for it. I don't know a household that budgets like that. I know that mine does not. It is about the revenue. So whatever you're bringing in, you can only spend what you bring in. So it shouldn't be based, and that's where you get into the kind of the needs and the wants. Well, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and then you figure out how to pay for it. So when we talk about shift, that's the shift. The shift probably should have occurred 10 years ago. Having a community that is growing, and when you are forecasting from the long-range financial plan, and those forecasts they don't produce what you're anticipating. So not necessarily a wash, right? But when you're talking about the balance, Broomfield has been fiscally sound for as long as I've been here, 21 years. You have to adapt to your circumstances along the way. And I mean external forces that we are not in control of. So when right now we're not in control of inflation, property taxes, we are not in control of property taxes. We are at the whim of property taxes. So those other key components of the platinum level services, this gentleman in front said, I love these services. I love that platinum level of services. I don't want to have anything happen to those services because of additional programs that are coming on board. So there's some communication and talk out there that oil and gas, right? The two words that make all of us cringe for one reason or another. The funds that were spent on oil and gas are paid out of revenue that we've collected by oil and gas. The additional accoutrements, and this is just one of those examples of a lot of the communication and talk that's out there, is that everything was great, Broomfield was great, and then 2 years ago we did a nosedive. Anybody that has a sense of budgeting and anything that is complex, it takes a long time to realize your decisions, good and bad, positive and negative. We have seen a growing spurt. We're the top rated county for growth. Some people say, oh, that's just so great. From a leadership perspective and somebody that lives here, I don't share that. Particularly when the structure that's been in place was not built to accommodate the buoyancy, right? So through COVID and all the other circumstances that we find ourselves in right now, a lot of talk about resiliency. We need to be resilient. We need to have a resilient community. I'm all for that. But resiliency means you have something left in the tank to give a little bit more. That is not what we're talking about as we're moving through the future with our finances. What we're talking about is buoyancy. Having the capability to adapt and adjust and to be more in control of our destiny and what that looks like. Primarily with development. Because there's so many extenuating circumstances that we are not in control of. So not to have control over what we can control does not serve us well. Our planning department, we have said no 2 times in the last 10 years to development. 10 years ago, and a lot of folks, again, with the last 2 years have just taken us into this this place that we're in right now. The structure has been here forever. It's served this community well since its inception. When you are growing leaps and bounds exponentially, and you are entering into, we'll talk more about it in a minute, the business development agreements, having a central repository for what each one of those little nuggets are in those business development agreements. What did we agree to give the developer now and in the future? And how does that impact the cumulative effect of where we are now? Each one of us, it's the totality of circumstances. Broomfield structure has been one project at a time. That does not bode well when you are looking at, we have to start making decisions based on where we are right now, get our arms around what we've already agreed to as a community over the last 15 years, find what that reconciliation is, and then have intentional decisions based on a totality of circumstances. So when we talk about a shift in budgeting, and it's a monumental shift, it's a shift for staff. A lot of folks talk about collaboration. In my mind's eye, collaboration is terrific until you have competing interests. And until you have competing interests and you start knocking things around a little bit, that's when you have like that creative abrasion, right? Where you can't have it all. The squirrel in the nut, that looks good, and that looks good, and that looks good. And agreements on each one of these developments that have come in over the last 15 years, they may have not even developed yet, right? But that layering effect and that cumulative effect on those decisions. We've made decisions based on one piece at a time. There has not been a day. I'm trying to be introspective here. If there has been a week without Jeff or Brenda, our CFO, or our economic development chief, coming to say, here's another little nugget that we were not aware of because there was no central repository in order to make those cumulative impacts and decisions. The last 18 months has been an interesting journey in gathering what those implications mean. Council focus sessions in the past have been a lot of fun. And not to say they weren't productive, but they were more about what's next. What other programs, projects, cool stuff to amplify and enhance the community. This last council retreat was not that. It was a realization of the decisions that have been made, the structures that were in place, and the finances, and not a 50,000 foot level, but a 5,000 foot level. I don't want to put the fear of God in someone because then you're paralyzed. But it was critical to understand exactly where we are. And I use exactly lightly, right? Because we continue to find these little, we found another little nugget today. So we're going to get into the presentation, but again, the communication about somehow this budgetary approach is going to help amplify spending. It's just the opposite. This council, the next 3 years for Broomfield, it's not going to be a lot of fun up here. And I'm in an enviable position. My two predecessors, meet with them monthly. We have a deep and meaningful relationship. We don't talk a lot about business. The decisions that were made a decade ago were based on the economics, the amount of growth we had left, and being in a really solid financial place. I would love to have been the leader for the last 10 years. A lot more freedom and flexibility. I feel like I am the bearer of realistic news every day. I'm grateful it's not a popularity contest because it's not a lot of jazz hands that are going on. When the gentleman talked about the cliff, at the retreat, we talked about a precipice, and we can see the precipice. Part of that is the number of residential units. So all those things that keep long-term residents in Broomfield attract other folks from around the nation and around the state to come to Broomfield, which is terrific until it isn't. So understanding what those intentional decisions are, I am not I'm not a jazz hands pretty picture. To me, it's all about the dollars and understanding what those competing interests are and serving a menu to our council. Whatever decisions they make them intentionally with the information. I'm sure that some of you were wondering about the Broomfield Town Square. That was pulled off of the agenda. It was supposed to go on the 29th. Gold crown of, we've been talking about it for a really long time. We are having 2-on-1s with our council before bringing that project back, because really understanding what that was, what it is, and what it will be before solidifying is really key. Not negative, not positive. Understanding exactly what it is before we move forward on that project. My key role is to be able to provide that comprehensive look, that it is not any one decision in and of itself, how everything is interrelated. When my name shows up on a memo, I take it seriously. And not just seriously. Setting up this community that I have served for 21 years, that I deeply love, to be buoyant. So we know that with inflation and exponentially increasing expenses, so we're up about 35 to 40% on our CIP. We have to build a system that accommodates those outside forces. Again, not to shore them up, right? But to be able to then make decisions based on not just what we're bringing in, but where we are from a totality of circumstances. What we're about ready to go into lays out what that structure looks like as we move forward. I wish I could say to this council that it's fun and it's easy to say yes. I don't struggle with saying no. I'd like to say yes, but only if it's based on accurate, intentional decisions, right? And so we talked a little bit before the meeting started. We are not at the place where we're reprioritizing. We're at the place where we are reallocating. So if there are 10 things that we are paying for right now, and there are additional things that we want, it's not about we're going to put this number 6 and something else goes to number 3. In my mind's eye, at least for the next 36 months, it is a reallocation of funds. What needs to go in order to make that happen? That's the overall premise of what those conversations need to look like. Doesn't sound like a lot of fun. Jake, let's go ahead and start the slide. So these were our objectives. Again, in years past, we had the latitude and the flexibility financially to look at the expenses, and then we kind of figured out where we wanted to be based on what we wanted to do. That is not where I am. That is not where we are discussing with council. It's not a sustainable approach as we come up on these next 3 years. You would not buy a car based on winning the lottery next year because you've been buying a lot of tickets and you feel really good about it. Same thing applies here. If we don't have the revenue in order to pay for it, those decisions become very different on those expenses. So again, understanding the current financial state and practices as we move forward. It is a mind shift. A lot of the conversations were, we have matrix teams now where we have legal at the table, we have development at the table, we have planning, engineering, finance, and CMO. So we all hear the same message at the same time, have the same dialogue. In years past, it's been a hub spoke. This is kind of what CMO wanted, and so it would be to the planning, this is important, let's do this. Engineering, this is what it needs to look like. Finance, this is what we want to do, make it happen. We have shifted that. Again, the budget is, and I know the inclination is to simplify. Here's this budget, here's this one, here's the expenses, but it's not like a household checkbook. It doesn't work like that. There are many long-term, short-term, intermediary costs that we have not accounted for. A lot of those business development agreements. A lot of the business development agreements include transferring pieces back to CCOB. There's not a mechanism in play. Well, there is now. We're about 80% there. It's taken 18 months. So before there's any shift from a leadership perspective, we have to have the structure in place before we recommend a shift to council. I would not recommend a shift to council and then follow it up with, and here's what the structure looks like. By the time we get to the structure, what it looks like in a complex situation, it's stale. So executing, and a lot of people have great ideas. I have this great idea, this great idea. If I hear one more great idea, if you don't know how to execute it, then it's just an idea. So we have to have that pipeline of really anticipating, acclimating, and making a decision. And sometimes that means saying no. It means saying no to development. It means saying no to projects. It means shoring up as we move through this. You can't add to the commercial base and do anything and do nothing else. This is too complex of an issue to have just one solution. It has to be a multi-pronged approach. We've also, over the last 18 months, and this is part of what I'm talking about with the structural piece, how do we help council make decisions about what's key and important on the front end? So that when developers, residential, commercial, mixed, go through the process, they have a modicum of a sense of what it is that we're looking for. So we'll, as Jeff moves into his piece, we've developed a matrix that has six different categories. So we look at Broomfield, we're about 80% built out, we have 20% left. We better be really strategic, surgically, about what goes where. So it's not just about the when, it's about the where. And it is about not stepping over $1 to pick up a dime because it feels good. A lot of the communities, I don't know if all of you read the state budget, getting ready to come out today. It's a little horrifying from my perspective. When you are banking on, and that's another from a budgeting perspective, when you budget based on expenses and not revenue, you do not have the opportunity or the ability to make the determination to be able to take the one-time dollars. And that becomes part of your revenue budget. We're not doing that. Anybody that takes the one-time ARPA dollars and creates a bunch of really cool, really great stuff, it's not sustainable, you don't have maintenance attached to it, and then you got to figure out where you're going to find that in the budget as you move forward. So when you base your budget on, again, expenditures, you're chasing that end number. You're going to do a shift, even if it's subconscious, you're going to do a shift in order to get to where you need to get. Versus, this is the dollars. This should drive all. So when we talk about residential and we talk about commercial, we don't want an expedited process to get to know. We only want an expedited process structurally from a staff perspective to get to, you got a really good shot. Can't guarantee anything, but based on this plan that we've agreed to on the front end, you have a pretty good shot in order to go through it. That is taking control of what our destiny looks like and saying no on the front end. Again, developers are not accustomed to Broomfield saying no, historically. I think I hit on all three of those. I mean, those three bullets, staff is not doing this community a service if we are not able to set a sustainable structure. So regardless of what council comes, the structure has to be that we have great rooms for them in our house, but it's the city and county of Broomfield's house. And various counts, they're renting a room in that house, and they're adding value by merely being in the house. But the structure itself has got to transcend into what's best for CCOB. So we're going to go through all of this relatively quickly. The economic influences, development impacts. We have set up a package deal, so this is never a one and done. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. So we're coming back to council. Also, in years past, just as a side note, there would be up to 26 budget amendments a year that council would see. There is no conceivable way that staff or a city council or a community would be able to track the cumulative effect with that. So it's a little bit of that chokehold, right? No. I know it feels good and we can kind of dig it. Not about that. We're going to bring it 4 times a year. We're going to be mindful and intentional about what's in there, what the ask is, and how it impacts the budget conversation that was before, during, and after. So again, it's those intentional decisions. April is the first budget amendment. We've had the federal act that came into play. A little over 90 employees were not being paid primarily because of, Brenda can speak a little bit to this, but They weren't, it wasn't just market range, right? It was the Federal Fair Pay Act. So you by law have to look at gender equality and a whole host of other components. That's not something that you can necessarily budget for, right? That's not a line item. It's what you budget for after the laws take effect, or the legislature. Nobody is safe when the legislature is in session. And the unfunded mandates that come are remarkable. So again, if the state isn't having a fiscally related policy that kind of mirrors our own, and when I say conservative, I don't mean political. Conservative to me means comprehensive, totality of circumstances, intentional decision making. So you wouldn't think that that would come from that you would need to be conservative in order to do that. What I'm finding, since I assume the city county manager role, 85% of the population wants to budget based on expenses. I want what I want. And when the state mirrors that same kind of those one-time hits, the ripple effect for the rest of us is extensive. That's also part of the buoyancy. We have to set room filled up to the recession is coming. It just is. Don't know when, probably the next 4 years. Buoyancy means from a sustainability perspective, a financially sustainable perspective, you're going to go under the water. How long can you hold your breath? If we rely on others to pull us up out of that water, then we have given away our power and direction, because what if they don't come along? We need to be able to organically hold our breath long enough to come back up. That's buoyancy. It transcends resiliency. Next slide, please. Again, we should not have called this philosophical shift. So I'm going to walk that back right now. It's not an 18-month process from now. We've been doing this internally with our teams for the last 18 months to now be able to execute on what this looks like. So after April, with the budget amendment, we're going to continue the conversation into May about residential development, June, commercial development and development agreements, July, how each one of those impacts and what the recommendations are as we move forward. So again, changes in our approach, how we do it and what we do. A lot of folks like to, affordable housing and sustainability. I want to be able to do all that as well. So does everybody else. But to think that because of affordable housing and sustainability and the other programs that we put in place, that we are where we are right now, it's elementary to think that. This took us a long time to get here. It cannot take us a long time to stabilize this ship because we don't have it. So the decisions that we will be recommending to council include residential development, what it is, and the pace. In the next 36 months, you all are going to be experiencing about a 12% increase in population. Yes, let me say that again, for those of you taking notes. There's about 6,000 units that have been approved that are coming online. Not in the last 2 years, but again, over a 5-year period of time in these developments. It's just hot right now, which is counterintuitive. Because Colorado is so damn expensive to live in that the money is in residential. And becoming surgical with our affordable housing units and what that looks like will become increasingly more intentional, and what those other accoutrements are that we want from these developers. What I'm talking about is going one step before that, before the development even comes in the door. We have to collectively be on the same page to be able to say, we're not there. We're next 24 months. And so I'm trying to be conscientious, because whatever I say right now, I don't social media. But I can see on the city manager Hoffman said that they're going to have these draconian measures. So I'm going to be I'm going to be tempered when I say this, but there has to be some type of regulator on residential, period. Ensuring that our infrastructure, we've had a structure that 80% the last 5 years, 80% has been on new, 20% on shoring up the infrastructure that we have. Not sustainable. We have to begin that transition shift. We've got to get back to the basics. And I know that may sound kind of cheesy to some, but fundamentally, that's exactly what it is. We have to be focusing our time, attention, energy, and finances, particularly on the infrastructure piece. Getting the water here, buying the water is one thing. We've been working on the Windy Gap for 20 years. Critical. What's also critical is making sure that the infrastructure that we have to deliver you water, we have. We have to make sure that our wastewater and those criteria and those triggers that we have in place, that we can meet them financially. There is CIP. So when you talk about CIP, capital improvement projects, those are not small dollars, those are big dollars. And anytime you're talking about infrastructure, those are big dollars. We need to ensure that we're shoring up that base. And every time we add additional, if your base isn't strong, you will begin to have cracks. Oh, geez, sorry. Okay. So a lot of folks talk about data-driven decisions. That's kind of the buzzword along with resiliency. Data-driven decisions are no joke. But in the world of data, if you don't know what to do with the data, and you're just collecting the data, those aren't sound data-driven decisions. So we have a structure and we have a staff that understands not just the level of importance, but understands the fundamental of taking that data in order to advise council on what the possibilities and options are. Again, it's not staff's responsibility to make the choices, right? It's our responsibility to provide full breadth of information to make well-informed, data-driven decisions when possible. Next slide, please. So we went some of the questions that came in online was a lot about the reactive and proactive. And again, if your narrative is things are we need to do something to the programs, right? So council priorities. People love to bring up the council priorities are just, they're taking us down this path of, my God, that is the least impactful, quite frankly. It's the development. It's the decisions about what comes next. That's where every single community member needs to be really focused on, not on the council priorities, but do we have a structure financially, leadership, execution that is disciplined enough to say no for right now? Yes, under these circumstances. That's a shift. So when we talk about proactive, I'm not going to read, anytime somebody does presentations and they read the presentations, it drives me nuts. So I'm not going to be one of those people. We've always had a balanced budget. That's another thing that's kind of floating around is, we don't have a balance. We always had a balanced budget. We have to. It's how we balance the budget. I want to balance the budget based on what we spend is what we make. The budget prior was balanced with other pots of funds that we did have, but one-time dollars, pass-through dollars, and that's a shift. So when the community saw the finances last year when we made this shift, it was an OMG moment, right? Because the community is accustomed to seeing $19 million rollover, $14 million rollover, $26 million rollover. So in the scheme of things, we have a $450 million budget that we manage. We're a big corporation. It's how you balance the budget, on what pots you balance the budget. That is key to me and to my team. And transitions suck. Nobody raises their hands and say, hey, dude, sign me up for something new. People should be skeptical. We want them to be skeptical. It helps us be better. It helps us hone our message. It helps us tailor what it is that we need to deliver. Next slide, please.
And John,
Yes, sir.
before you go on, is it fair to say that in the proactive box that the balanced budget is based on revenue, is revenue replaceable with drivers there, or can you go into more detail on what drivers really are?
You bet. Brenda, is this your slide?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm gonna have Brenda, so these are the drivers. Again, and what the influences are for each one of these drivers. When it was, so forecasting, right? We talked earlier, long-range financial plan. It's a plan. Forecasts they never come out the way you think. Very seldom is it in the positive. When we talk about development and we have huge development, a risk is one of them. We were banking on long-range financial plan, a lot of commercial. So when we say commercial, we mean light industrial, retail, flex space, office space, medical space. The only thing that really costs us is residential. So there's a difference between 7% and 29%. So when we look at our neighboring communities, and I'm not going to say their name because I've done that from the dais before, and then their city managers call me that night. I'll get a text message, so I'm not going to do that. That ratio, that balance, it is your sustainable future, or it isn't. We'll find out here just in a minute. But from the driver's perspective, when we talk about diversification of funds, it's not just diversifying more funds coming into the budget, right? Again, it's being disciplined about spending what it is you have and having a smaller percentage, especially the next 3 years, where you're willing to risk. 10 years ago, right? And everybody's like, God, I want to go back to the good old days. That means different things to different people. We also know that there isn't any going back. When it's flush, it's much easier to make those decisions. So when we're talking about drivers, for the first time, we have redevelopment. So we have baseline, new green development, much easier to develop. Redevelopment, Flatirons Mall, which was accelerated with COVID. It's part of that resiliency piece, right? COVID drops the bottom out. We probably won't recover from what we had trended we were going to get during those years of COVID. Big gap. So that's part of the reason when we look at the budget now, it's not the last 2 years. It's the cumulative effect of decisions that were made before, coupled with outside influences. Not to mention the inflation that we're seeing right now. So those economic drivers are all of those pieces sales tax, property tax, PS. When we talked before about, we don't have anything to do with property taxes. We don't set it. When you look at your tax bill, a lot of people don't look at their tax bill. I have to admit, I was one of them. And all those line items just continue to add up. So when they write the check to CCOB, people are thinking, those are our dollars. They're not. We keep about $1,300 for a rooftop. The expenses for those platinum level services that you love, that we want to continue to keep for you, are almost $3,000. Those will increase, right, based on our operational costs ever increasing. So there's the one more. Please. Property tax, use tax. Also, a lot of, Brookfield's going to increase your taxes. You increase your taxes unless we come to you and say, hey, here's what we want to do. That said, all indications are 2023. Our assessor is here, Jay Yamashita, for questions afterwards. 2023, we are looking at and anticipating 12 to 15% increase in property tax. I say that slow with emphasis, like I'm reading to you, because that makes a difference in what we do as a community about adding anything else, being cognizant of something outside of our control that's going to impact your household. So having conversations about adding anything additional, those really mindful conversations that we're having now, there isn't any indication that any one of those is going to increase. Here's what is going to increase. Part of the, and I know this is going to be counterintuitive, Brookfield's cheap to develop. By that, I mean our surrounding communities. Well, I'll wait for Brenda, because if you see it, if you see the slide, it makes a, we tout the fact that we've never increased our mill levy ever since we became a sitting county, 28 mills. Other communities increase their mill levy as services become more expensive and their population grows. We've never done that. So residents say, geez, that's great. It's just like when I say, Brookfield staff is known for being lean and mean. Granted, do more with less. Granted, we're 150 employees under where we would be if we stayed with the same ratio from 2012. We've increased the population damn near double since 2012. That's increasing our commitment to maintain those services. So that gap will only become larger and larger and larger. So when we talk about the 3% revenue is flat and expenses are 8%, the majority of those increase on that 8% are those making sure that small community, we have 2 community centers. We've never gone to the community and said, like every other neighboring community, they don't do bonds a lot of the time for their accoutrements. We didn't do a bond for HHS. We didn't do a bond for BCC. We did do a bond, but the revenue bond comes out of the general fund. A lot of communities go back to their community and say, how badly do you want a community center? And the community, the residents say, badly, I'll pay extra for that. And then that's the revenue stream that you use to pay for that amenity or accoutrement. We don't do that. So again, kind of capping the where you can see right here. So those communities didn't start out with those mill levies, right? They increase them over time. There's not an exponential increase over time. Our fees are low. We're digesting information now for our rate study. This council was the first during COVID having the conversations about debt. How much debt do we have? What is that ratio? We've never had a debt ratio policy. We've never had a debt policy. We just go into debt. We now have a debt policy. Remember when I was talking about, what was going to happen in April and May and June and July, and the culmination into August? Part of that includes the debt conversation that we have gotten our arms around about what we owe, where we are. First Bank Center is a huge conversation that I know that no one is looking forward to, including myself. But those are all pieces of a pie that were established long before any of the folks that are on my team, including myself, had a part of it. So understanding and digesting that. It all gets back to that cumulative effect. The big picture is what we need to understand. Next slide, please. Remember I was talking about the COVID? This is the gap. That would be at 72 million. We're at 62. So again, absorbing. So, and it's not just one number, right? It's not just the 10 million. It's what it means as we move forward. Because if you do a trend, if you're thinking that something's going to happen in this year, then of course you're thinking that happened that year, and then everything else moving forward has that same premise. So it accumulates, the gap will continue to accumulate. So it's not a one for one. It's not an apple that you take away because you don't have the funds for it. A much bigger conversation between what we thought was going to happen, what is actually happening. Baseline, what we thought was going to happen, Arista, what we thought was going to happen, and then the recession. So all of that commercial development that we were banking on from a general fund perspective didn't happen. It's happening now, but it's 15 years after the fact. So when we enter these business development agreements, baseline is one of them, we agree on the front end based on the premise that we understand and what they understand. I wish it could be pay for service, right? You give me the service and I pay you, and we're both really happy about it. That's not development. Development doesn't work that way. You have to be able to absorb and have buoyancy when those trends or forecasts don't turn out the way you hope they would. Similar to your investment portfolio. I just turned 55. I pull out my AA pre-card and I'm proud of it. Part of that conversation is my risk of my investments are not nearly as risky as they were 5 years ago. That will even narrow further in the next 5 years. Budget is the same. How far out do we want to extend a risk of something really great happening? Pictures look good, video's good, developer paints this picture, and we're all in. Next 3 years are incumbent upon all of us to really be able to say, how does this fit in the big scheme of things, knowing what we know right now, not what we think will happen. Are we going to make those decisions based on what's happening right now? Next slide, please.
Jennifer,
Mhm.
here's a quick question.
Yeah, please.
You guys received some funds from federal and state last year. I think it was about $10 million.
Yes,
Where
ma'am.
did that go to?
So the question was the ARPA funds. So we received a total of 20 million, 10 million last year, 10 million this year. Those funds and the ARPA dollars, there's criteria that you have to spend them in the hardest hit areas for COVID. So primarily the low income areas. Diverse area. Brenda, add to that, would you? It hasn't gone anywhere. We still have that.
Okay, sure. What will happen is you'll see that from the first budget amendment. So we've received that first 10 million and we'll appropriate the 3 million that so it's a total of 10 million. 3.3 was for the city services, and then the 6 million, the remainder was the county services. And so that portion will be allocated. You'll see that in the first budget amendment at the end of April, where we will appropriate those dollars because we didn't want to overinflate. And we wanted to set aside those one-time revenues. And we'll do the same thing when we get the second tranche of those ARPA dollars. We'll be reallocating at that time. And as City Manager Hoffman mentioned, what we'll do with those, unlike our surrounding communities, we will be incorporating that to existing projects. So therefore, we're not going after new projects because one of the hardest things to do is start a new program and not have funding to support that as we move forward, whether it's operation maintenance. So we've already identified back in November of 2021, we came before council, presented a list of projects that were previously existing, meet the criteria, whether it was utilities, so water, sewer, broadband. Those are some areas that we're hitting, and then revenue recovery was about 4 million. So that can go back into the general fund. So purpose for the unhoused, for example, was an area that that hit as well. So those are just some general high-level categories.
Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah, of course.
So those were another one of that pocket of money we didn't want to include in the general fund, right? I mean, again, that's not cushion money. And we wanted to ensure that when we recommended to council the 5 areas to spend, we're high and tight on the infrastructure. Next slide, please. Sales tax rate. So that may not seem like a big gap. It is. And again, this is for that we're tax crazy. This is not the case. So next slide, please. So you can see here, and for those of you, sir, I know that you probably know this, but so the general fund is different than the enterprise fund. So our water fund, the money that we generate from water stays in water. So you can't borrow from Peter to pay Paul, and vice versa. So really, it's a methodology, and that's one of the complexities of the city and county piece, right? Is we have 2 very complex budgets that are woven into one, not just for the services, but also from the utilities perspective. Next slide, please. And this is, Brenda, when are we coming with the rate study?
In June or July.
June or July. So we did the water rate study. Again, that's part of staff never likes to deliver bad information. I shouldn't say information, news, right? Nobody wants to bring the community or council information about kind of what isn't fun and happy. So not having a rate study for 2012 was the last rate study. So are you guys tracking with me about what great fun it's been for this new team over the last 2.5 years of where we are, decisions we've made, and what we need to do. So each one of these components plays into that totality of circumstances of if something didn't happen then, something needs to happen now. And we'll have a better sense of that as we move through this rate, the rate study. So between no bond or debt policy and putting that together, rate study hasn't been done since 2012. And then the inventory of the plethora of business development agreements and what that turnover looks like, and what the triggers are with our population increase to our water and sewer and wastewater. So we have a trigger that when we reach a certain population, a certain capacity of our wastewater system, it triggers by statute, we have to begin planning for that expansion. We're gonna blow right by the design phase, we're gonna go right into build, or what that looks like. So our question, again, it seems fundamental, we go back into, is that programmed? Is that 25 million programmed for those fundamentals? And the answer now is yes. But again, it's acclimating to the resource allocation. So here's what we know. Revenues are flat, we've said that. Our forecasting requires a fluid approach to accommodate unforeseen impacts and circumstances that are outside of our control. This staff has now we know what we know where we are, and the community has told us what is important to them. It is my fiduciary duty, as well as your leader, to ensure that you all know where we are, what we're doing, and where we're going. So growing the base, what does growing the base mean? Well, we know what it doesn't mean, and it doesn't mean adding more residential. I can't wait for when I get home tonight after some of these comments. But it's a good opportunity for, this is what it is, right? So having the base grow organically isn't enough. There's no silver bullet. So again, adding more commercial without changing the structure or the mindset isn't enough. Slowing residential isn't enough. Having decisions that are intentional isn't enough. We are talking about a multi-pronged approach to keep us at this strong foundation upon which all of you that have been here for, I know Rick's been here for, I don't know, forever, and keeping us whole and healthy. And it's a challenging every day. So again, what does the commercial look like is as important as where it goes. We have a team now, Brookfield has never, we haven't chased development. It's always come through the door. We have a team now that is compiled and has the skill set and the mindset to be able to say, in this space, this is what we want, let's go get it. And then we bring it. But when we bring it, we have to have the process in place to be in alignment with our council that they too say this development now, under these circumstances, to expedite it. What all those residential coming online means for our staff is permits, timeframe, and you can't add more permit text without adding review staff. If you add in planning, you have to add in engineering. If you add in engineering, you have to add in HR because you're going to hire the people. And the biggest piece that we need to talk about is public safety. And the offer, we don't have a ratio right now. We've been talking about it, about when there is an automatic, when there's a population increase, automatically, you don't have to go through budget decision packages and all of, what does it look like in order to do the fundamental, which is keeping our community safe? And, well, so there you go right there. Slow or delay residential, super popular. And then again, the diversification, our permit, yes, sir.
Well, I was going to ask about the permit and design plan reviews. It's one thing to calculate what it costs to cover the staff that you
Sure.
deliver.
Yeah.
It's another thing to actually set up a separate fund and manage those functions totally within that fund, so that the departments that are hiring are paying from that fund. And what that could lead to is a strategy of saying you hire some of the people as contract employees.
Sure.
Because it's a cyclical environment and you have to be able to let those people go when the workload is down. And have you considered going that far with it?
Yes,
Okay.
we absolutely have. And we have to have an opening. And so the way that you're thinking right now, again, the hardest thing that I ever had to do in my professional career and as a leader was the furloughs. The thought of setting something up to have to go through something like that again is not anything that I ever want this organization to experience. So contracting, again, we're in the middle of the great resignation, and everybody thought that we were going to come off of that. That's not happening. It's a different world that we live in. It's a mobile world. It's a flexible world. It's a virtual world. And it's no wonder that a lot of our neighbors are saying, no more virtual, right? Mid-manager, hell no, right? It's hard. It's hard to connect. It's hard to acclimate. We have to acclimate. Next slide, please.
Before you go on.
Yes, sir.
So the changing your fees to cover the actual costs of permitting and all that, kind of sense. Can you explain how the last part of that sentence, increasing fees, adjusting your levy, sales taxes, how that's not expense-based budgeting?
Sure. So these aren't recommendations, right? And so when we look at if you're thinking again that you're going to throw money at a problem, but you're not going to change the structure of why you got to that problem, and the default is let's raise taxes, right? So it's not complicated from where you are. You either cut services, you raise taxes, or you pay fine detailed attention to where you are right now, and you make the decisions that wouldn't support that. I know that, again, being a resident and having a fiduciary and a heart duty to love this community, knowing the impact that you all will experience in 2023 for the property tax increase, the thought of doing any type of increase would be, no, I'd be sitting in the audience saying, hey, we need to think through what all those are. So this is really just how you diversify. It is not a recommendation by any stretch of the imagination. Next slide, please. And you know what's interesting too is it's got, for those that have kids in the audience, a lot of people talk about win-win, and kind of in our household it's keeping everybody equally unhappy, right? So we have folks that have written in on the questions that say we need to cut services. This is just too much. I don't want to pay for this. And then we have other folks that say you better shore some things up, because that is not an option, right? So again, it's that measured approach. We'll talk about a little bit about this. Expenditures 8, revenues 3. Anybody? Yeah, yes, sir.
Question on that. So
Yeah.
if property taxes are going up, let's say 12%, and Broomfield keeps 25% of that, isn't that? I guess that is.
Yes. So again, it's the and this is not a built in stone, and this is another one of those, every time we put something out, people fixate on this, right? Like, what terrible thing have you done in order to get us to this spot? Missing the point. Point is, being mindful and intentional isn't an ask anymore. It's a requirement, because this is where we are. And that's why one of those pieces, the solution to a complex problem, is not an easy answer, ever. It's the multi-pronged approach. And part of that includes slowing on residential. Next slide, please. So here's the fund budget and associated services. This is what makes up the overall 8%, but you can see in those budget line items, where that increase is coming from. Capital, we're going to have to be, again, it's part of that shift of philosophy of not spending on new, but really shoring up on what the base of our fundamental infrastructure looks like. And it is expensive. And ensuring that that fundamental nature begins to shift from the 80% new, 20% maintenance to over the next 2 years. And this is an aggressive goal, and I probably shouldn't say it out loud because then I'm going to be held to it. 50-50. But eventually we have to get to the place where that's flipped. And that starts with being really mindful about any additional residential growth that we have that places additional pressure on the existing infrastructure. So this is where you can, so those are base services, the new areas of focus. We're all anticipating oil and gas is supposed to wrap in August. I think that it's short to say that from a community perspective and a level of staff effort that everybody's ready for that to happen. So we brought on the new facility, which increased the number of FTEs, finding that sweet spot between contracting and FTEs and the specialty that includes. So 2010, you can see the exponential growth, right? That it continues to grow exponentially. And so some in the audience, when I say, we're 150 under from a FTE perspective for service delivery, they say, good for you. It's great for the residents, not great for staff. So again, it's minding that balance of delivering the services and not working 15-hour days. Some of the council inquiries on the pending discussions, becoming our own utility for waste haulers, transportation, providing our own bus system, lodging tax increase, the senior property tax. That was one of the, having a lot of those conversations. Our fastest growing population in Brookfield is our seniors. Eventually I will be the senior services manager, which PS, I tried for that job and I didn't get hired for that job about 12 years ago. So seniors are something to me that it's more than a population that we serve. So from the housing perspective and the hit on the property taxes breaks my heart. So this bullet, staff put it up there, and again, through the public digestion, we started getting a lot of questions of, you're going to cut the senior property tax.
City Manager Hoffman, I was actually to that point.
Yeah.
I was speaking with one of our senior residents today for an hour and a half about what they keep hearing, how these, property taxes are really going to possibly put them out of their homes. They do already have the state exemption, but it's not enough. It's not enough to absorb a 10 to 18% increase. So truly, I think that's something that deserves attention because it is a real fear with many of our senior residents.
Absolutely. And so if you read that bullet, it's exploring giving a subsidy, not removing anything. So again, as we move through that, that's that reallocation methodology, right? So adding that means what? community priority, mayor's priority. It is no joke. So, next slide, please.
Jennifer, one question, you go back,
Yeah, of course.
one slide. Enhanced program services and facilities. Do you have a few examples of what fits into that? Because looking at this,
Sure.
base services makes sense. Enhanced services, program services and facilities, and even some of the things over there. When you talk about an 8% increase, the thought goes to, if you're going to get things back in alignment, why are we adding more?
Yeah. Well, so this is the snapshot. So when we say new areas of focus, we don't mean we're bringing on new areas. We're saying those areas in 2020. I haven't heard any recommendations about bringing anything new on to absorb that. Did that answer your question? So these aren't new areas of focus. Those are focus areas that came in 2020.
Fine, I just, but the question still becomes, if I'm looking at it from just an operational budget perspective,
Sure.
there have to be, you got more areas now needing to look at as far as what can be, to your point, surgically looked at.
Yeah.
The concern I think that I'm expressing is you look at those and see, it's not just base services that have come in, it's new areas, fine. The question I think is there going to be a hard look at a few of these, and then I look even a little bit further over in terms of council and corps, waste hauler, transportation. Why are those things even on the table at this point?
So I'm going to answer this delicately. So it isn't on the table. We've had subsequent conversations on that, but I didn't want to change the slide. Wanted you to see the slides that came from the council meeting. So still discussion about going to a vote for a single trash hauler on the ballot. We're not talking about a transportation utility nor lodging tax or any other kind of tax.
I could throw in 2 cents on the single trash hauler idea. It's been discussed in various municipalities over time. It can actually save the end user money by making more efficient collection than having 8 trucks come down the street every week.
Sure, I understand, and I'm not wanting to get into a debate or that. I'm just trying to understand the logical reason behind. We know where we're at in terms of the spend versus tax revenue, and seeing another list of potential items on there is worrisome. So, sorry.
So I can safely say for the next year, no. Next slide, please. So again, this is if we stayed where we are with the decision-making and trends for development, if we stayed where we are right now and the income, this is what it would look like. So again, this slide emphasizes the measures that need to be swiftly adopted and executed. Yeah, it'd been great to be, 2017, right?
Want to go for a lotto?
Oh, you're funny. You're bringing the funny out.
So, what do you see?
I'm sorry, what do you see as your biggest expenditures in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. Infrastructure. The emphasis on that again with those units coming on. it adds an additional sense of urgency to switch that 80-20, right?
I also know that pension funds are also a big problem. Is that another expenditure you see is increasing?
No, no. We don't have, we don't have anywhere, we don't have issues with our pension. We haven't divested, we haven't, we're not at a, yeah. So we're not para, we're not kind of rolling the dice. Brenda, do you want to talk a little bit about anything else?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of, so this slide is seeing our FTEs, which City Manager Hoffman will discuss, but so associated costs related to that, they will go up. We're not in concern since we're self-funded in terms of there are additional costs, but we have enough reserves that are sitting aside that we've set aside for those specific retirement pension plans. So we're confident where they stand currently.
Just to clarify, does Broomfield have a defined benefit pension plan
Such a great question.
or not?
No, we're self-funded. We used to have one. And so when did we stop doing that? I went to be, we had it when I started. And then I left to be a contractor, and then I came back, we didn't have it anymore. So sometime between 1996, 2006 and 2009. And then we're in a self-funded program.
That would be more budget risk.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. Which is one of the reasons that they started going away from it. Yes, sir.
On your last slide, you were showing the difference between revenue and expense. And I was just adding up the bar difference. So the next 5 years, it looks as if we're $100+ million out of expending over revenue. Is that correct? And what are you guys projecting over the next 5 years? What do you project from that slide? What number is that?
Sure. I'm gonna have the person that actually knows. Okay, she's gonna pull it up and then we'll get back to you. Does that sound
That's
good?
fine. Because it's a scary number. If you're
Heck
just
yeah.
looking at this, we're
Yeah,
talking about, yeah.
yes. Right. Yeah,
Just to clarify, so this is just a forecast. By no means is this where we intend to be, right? And so we are required to have a balanced budget, which we will always comply with in terms of what we present. So this is merely a forecast intended to show if we continue at the same pace, and that really that expenditures are outpacing revenues that are coming in.
Yeah.
So adjustments and decisions.
It's over 100 million, am I correct?
Correct, if we stay at that same pace, but obviously none of us have that magic 8 ball. So what we're doing is doing our best in terms of having that controlled approach and really that conservative fiscal approach, right, in everything that we look at. So we continue to monitor and make adjustments. So we're in the process of finalizing our audits for the 2021 the annual comprehensive financial report. Change the acronym. So in terms of that, we should be done by the end of March. And so we'll be coming to council typically in June. And so we'll have the audited numbers then, and we'll have a better idea of where that forecast is looking. And what we'll do is update those numbers prior to the second budget amendment. So we'll have a better understanding of that forecast. Yeah, of course.
So clearly, May, June, July, and August are going to be show-worthy for the council meetings. A lot of stuff, right? That's deeply impactful. Do you have a question? So here's the FTEs, the FTE count per applicant. Yeah, I think we've touched on each one of these already. Any questions on these? Okay. Next slide, please. So the operational expenditures, being a local government, of course, your biggest expense is your folks. And then we look out the 23 through 27. And again, all of these slides are designed to do one thing. And so I hadn't planned on having a community forum. I mean, that came after having the council meeting and then wanting the community to, again, hear exactly what council heard and see and have that dialogue. All of these slides, so the intended purpose is to stop you in your tracks so that we can set the stage for what that shift needs to look like. And equally important, the sense of urgency in order to make that happen. This is another one of those slides. So again, it's a complex problem that has been accruing for the last decade. We just happen to be the lucky crew that gets to discover it and detail out what comes next. Next slide, please. So again, we've talked about understanding the true costs. Again, having expenditures meet revenues, not the other way around, right? And so in years past, every year, and you can kind of understand why we are where we are. No debt policy, no comprehensive accumulation of project by project impact. Haven't done a rate study since 2012. Sprinkle a little COVID on there. The life of flat irons, right? So we talked a little bit about baseline being new development, flat irons being redevelopment. Redevelopment means, like anything else, that's where you're going to put your money because you know that that's where we continue to generate revenue. And over the next 3 to 5 years after the redevelopment, we anticipate increasing the revenues, not back to where we were, right? Because it's a different world that we live in. So there are things in the works that will impact the expenses side. There are also a significant number of things that are in the pipeline that will impact the revenue slide. So taking any one of these slides as a snapshot that it is what it is won't serve anyone well. Short-term, long-term costs. That's another. It's another. Again, from a cumulative effect on where you are now. Before we make any future decisions, we have to really shore up where we are. One-time ongoing expenses. Another reason that a lot of our communities you've read about. Well, I don't know if you have, but Adams County's in a little bit of a jam. Excuse me. And some of our municipalities are with how they spent their ARPA dollars, their one-time dollars. I know there's a big push for us to what are you doing with the dollars? What are you doing with the dollars? We did not take that approach. We had our team do a comprehensive communication with the state through the feds to be able to say, this is what we're thinking. Is this in line? Yes or no? So essentially, we had the seal of approval before anything happened. That information drove staff's recommendation to council for their approval on those 5 components for those expenditures, none of which included anything that would require more than a one-time hit. Again, so a lot of the communities are, because it looks good, sounds good, only pay for it one time. How you're going to accommodate that in your budget is a completely different story. Colorado as a whole will look very different in the next 3 years. Can't have the skyrocket without the fall. Service level impacts, talk about all that. Again, those 3 bullets seem super simple. They're very complicated. It takes a mindset and a team approach to really have a multidisciplinary team at the table to hear the conversation from the beginning to end and challenge each other. We can still see a little bit of the mind shift when we talk about development and our engineer and planner is at the table. I said, what do you think? It's becoming accustomed to sitting at the decision table. You have to have an opinion. The directive of, we really want this, make this happen, that is not where we are. So we have to be able to mix it up. We have to be able to have that diversity of opinions to be able to say yay, nay, adjust, too soon, not enough, not here. And the matrix teams that we've created throughout CCOB brings that to the table. And the conversation, and that's why we've been able to set this structure in place in such a short period of time. 18 months doesn't sound like a short period of time, but to have the structure before we brought to council what needs to happen next, we're able to execute. And it's the mindset that is vastly different. So again, there's the big word, right? We are not talking about reprioritizing. That is not where we are. We're talking about reallocation. Being disciplined enough.
The difference there again. I don't
Yeah.
think that's quite getting the, reallocation.
Sure. So I think in years past, sir, so if you have 10 things that are on the table and you don't have the conversation about how are they weighted, right? What is the level of impact? What's the cost in order to execute them? In my mind's eye, everything should have a dollar amount. Doesn't matter what it is. And where we are right now, while we shore this up for the next 3 years, we're not talking about moving something from number 2 down to number 8. What we're talking about is, of those 8 things on the list, if you want anything else added to that list of 8, something comes off. It doesn't move down because there's a finite pot of money that each one needs to have a portion of. So we need to move one step before that step to be able to say, what is key? What is fundamental to us to move through the next 3 years being really disciplined? So that's the difference in my mind's eye. So when we're talking about it, right, we need to reprioritize. That isn't where we are. So it truly is a reallocation of a finite pot of funds. And then that drives the conversation of, this looks really good. I really want to do this. It's super cool and it's impactful. All right. Here's the pot of money. Here's what we're doing already. What is it that isn't as impactful as what you want to have happen that comes off? It's that conversation. And those are oftentimes pretty uncomfortable conversations to have, particularly when you've been accustomed to, well, let's just put it, let's have it at number 10, but let's just keep it on the list. And somehow number 10 sometimes becomes number 2 with no dollar amount attached. And then you're in this kind of quagmire of, what is the most important thing? So part of that means getting back to those basic questions of fundamentally what it is, gotta flush our toilet, gotta be able to drive, gotta have the transportation, gotta be able to deliver the water, gotta have public safety, right? So those fundamentals is why I say reallocation. Accessibility, availability. Victims of our success with regards to open space and trails. These people want to come here. because we have such a remarkable connected system. We're at about 33% of our open space goal of 40%. The thought of transitioning any of that, my name certainly won't be on that memo, I can tell you that, right? But that makes everything more critical to understand what comes next. So when we look at a GIS map of our 34 square miles and there's 20% left to develop, we better be really mindful of what goes there. And we better be really mindful about when it goes there. Do you have a question?
Just to that point, coming back to what you mentioned before, saying no or no right now. Maybe I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah.
You have attainable housing up there, we have accessibility and availability. I know there's a lot of desire to provide affordable, attainable housing in Brookfield. What I'm hearing is we're gonna slow things down. That in and of itself is gonna drive up, just from a supply and demand perspective, pricing and costs on housing. How does that happen? Where does that balance? Because I think
Yeah.
I see those two things diametrically opposed, but I don't see the way that, I will use the priority word.
Yeah.
How that priority is being balanced out and how is that hard conversation being had? Because I don't think it's being had.
Well, so it is being had. And you will see more of it when staff comes with the recommendations about what's next. So again, the modification of housing includes housing, right? So when we get those affordable units, and it's awesome, we have 400 affordable units. We also have 6,000 regular units, right? So again, that strategic approach of we have 60% and 80% of AMI. So part of your question, which is one that we discuss a lot, which is that targets, when we think about the number of units, the size of units, and affordability. Affordable housing, when our AMI is $100,000. When we think about affordable housing, buying a house, if you make $80,000, that's, I don't know about you all, but I don't know how affordable that looks, right? And so then people get into the semantics of attainable and affordable. So from an access perspective, having a more strategic approach of it can't be all from 30% AMI to 80% AMI. So I'm going to throw this out here, and then again, I'm going to just get all these kind of stuff going on. Maybe for the next year, we only target 40%. If you can't bring, if your development isn't 100% affordable at 40% of AMI, we want you, maybe not now. So those conversations are happening. They are difficult. It does require additional conversations that are or are not adopted. But the full spectrum of, again, we have to take a step before even that conversation occurs. That we are in alignment before the developer comes in the door. That our chasers say, here's our target population for 2024, 2025, 2026, because it takes 2 years, right? I mean, again, that pipeline of getting them and getting them in. But, you know, the continued yes, 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 those days are over. You see why running for class president, I probably wouldn't win right now. Simply because it is a shift. It's a shift, and it's not just a 2-year shift. It's a fundamental shift of how we approach that. We don't ask those questions when it's already occurred. We become in alignment on the front end to be able to say, we, figuratively and literally speaking, we are going to be in the driver's seat for the next 3 years. There's no rotating. We have to be able to determine to give a sense of stability, figuring out over the last decade of where we are. We're going to continue to discover that. Like I said, every week it's a new nugget. That it has to influence the decisions.
And I take it you analyze when we're taking a look at the affordable type housing that you're looking at, how that affects with the graph we were talking about before on this overall difference between revenue, and you have analysis on that and what effect it would make on building versus this particular program, because this particular program would obviously have an overall cost of revenue versus having a housing to be built however the other parties without having all the variances.
Right.
Would be good, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And that's, and so that those have been the conversation over the 18 months that have now established, really being able to identify, we talked earlier, every rooftop costs our community, our CCOB, about $3,000. The taxes we get for that same rooftop is about $1,300. Jeff, $2,400.
Would you go to slide 30? So to this question or to this point, we put together this graphic to help understand this and to illustrate it. So as you can see on the right side, that's what we have estimated what the cost of an average house in Broomfield from the services, police, fire, or not fire, but police, public works, et cetera. So as you can see, it's 2,470 is what that amount is. And that was estimated a year and a half ago. So it's moved up a little bit, but that gives you that sense. And you can see the proportionality by the colors of exactly how that works. In your packet, this is page 30. On the right side, what you see is the revenue coming from that house. So as Jennifer has pointed out, as City County Manager Hoffman has pointed out, it's roughly about $1,300 to $1,400 in property taxes, but there's also some other fees. There is, as an example, sales tax that, we all see the Amazon trucks, the UPS trucks coming. So there's sales tax and other things that we've attributed to each of these homes. So that difference is roughly $2,470 in the cost of meeting those programs and services that you all expect, police, access to the library, et cetera. And we're receiving about $1,700. So for the average home, single family home here in Broomfield, this is the Broomfield cost. It doesn't include the school district and the fire district. That difference is about $770 per home that we lose. I shouldn't say lose, that's not a fair way to say it, but costs us more than the revenue we receive. All sources of revenue
Over a period of
1 year.
1 year. Okay.
So to your point, that's the average typical house. Now, obviously, that is not a $2 million house, nor is it a $250,000 house. It's the average house. Okay. So clearly, more $2 million houses will produce more property tax and produce other things. So that's the thing. So this is the average home.
Over a 5-year period that flips, and then where are you at?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
After
that?
5 years, you were saying that's in the first year, and when the house is.
No, that's an average year. So it just stays that way.
Stays that way. Is
Every year,
the cost is
every year.
typically, the difference in that cost is at 17.
And you can imagine, therefore, how could the city for the last, we've been a city now 60 years, we've been a city county for 20. How have we been able to do that? The difference is King Soopers, Home Depot, Flatirons are all producing revenue for the city in various ways, property tax and sales tax is being collected. And our expenses for those are less than what we're getting from revenue. So that balancing is, as the city and county manager pointed out very early on, that relationship between commercial and residential becomes critically important. So as we look both backwards and as we look forward, if we're seeing a lot of housing coming on, you can imagine that begins to create that that representative number that we're showing in that other graph where the orange also elevated above. Because if we don't do anything, That's what happens. Under state statute, of course, all cities must be balanced. And so therefore, that's what we have to do, is figure out how to adjust expenses and hope, as an example, that gasoline prices, material costs aren't as high as they have been for the last year. If that comes back in line, that's great. But to Manager Hoffman's point, that's the buoyancy. Some years we're going to be a little below the water. Some years we come above. But what we're trying to figure out is how to make sure that we internally have that buoyancy to stay above the water year after year after year. Sometimes we'll fall slightly below, but we can make it through 1 year, but not 10 in a row. Does that help you, sir? Thank you.
We appreciate that. And so when we talk about the 8%, that's part of it, right? The operational costs continue to increase, as well as everything else. I don't remember what slide we're on. I want to be mindful of your time. So we'll fly through the rest of these pretty quickly. Jake, do you remember where we were?
Yeah, I can go back to where we were.
Yeah, so mind the gap. So so that's another. So when people hope something happens, I would say hope is not a strategy. I don't base anything on hoping. So essentially, what we're doing is we're minding that gap. Next slide, please. Part of the development conversation. If not here, where? If not now, when? We've been having that conversation. So I've been in the role 2.5 years, 2 of which were COVID. So having the ability now to have the staff and the structure in place to actually be able to actualize the structure, to be handing council a packet that says, here's the recommendation. If not now, when? And if not here, where? And as we all know, it takes time to shift. It's fundamentally, it took us 10 years to get here. 2012. Gonna take us 3 years to right the ship, right? We need to act, we need to execute and activate now. We'll start seeing the benefits 2024, 2025. And when I say benefits, I probably shouldn't use that word either. We'll see the impact of those decisions in an upward trajectory versus going the opposite direction. So again, I'm not sure where Cliff came in, but it's probably semantics. We are not at the fiscal, we were not at the precipice. The whole point is we don't want to get there. I do want to say, however, that we can see it. It is not around the bend. It is in front of us. We talked about a lot of this already. We are not doing one-offs. There's no way to be able to have a comprehensive approach when you have a structure that supports one-off decisions. Next slide, please. This was the matrix that we've been working on really for 2 years and filling in those gaps. And essentially, it's being mindful of new development, baseline, redevelopment, flat irons, newer development, Arista, and infill. Infill is not fun. It's not fun for council. It's not fun for the community. And it's certainly not fun for staff. Infill is where you, Dillon Point, where you have an existing neighborhood and development pops up, density, right, which is the wave of the future. So if you can't go out, you go up. But folks that are there and have been there and bought there are not accustomed to that. Brookfield Town Square, another infill project. You'll be seeing more of those. So the categories on the left are the various, what's the character of each one of these developments. And then the pie chart shows kind of the tolerance level of where those individual projects could go. We need to be able to have tools in our tool belt that help us align with council to chase and to say no. No isn't during the process. The next 3 years, we got to get to the front end where looks good, come back. Again, so we have the land, scale, transportation, the economics. It's a totality matrix that allows decision-making to be made through a lens that provides us a comprehensive overview to make that decision.
Is this document available someplace to download? And is it a living document? Will it continue to change, or is it pretty much fixed for now?
No, absolutely. And again, that's part of the structure is we have to adapt, right? And so where we were 18 months ago, this looks different now. We have 6,000 units coming, right? So it's just like, and people get kind of fixated on budget, right? A budget is a document that's fluid. Finances and structure are very different than budget, right? The budget will shift. The budget will move based on outside influences and internal influences. So yeah, it's on our economic development page. Next slide, please. 2022 and beyond. So again, this is so when we use this vernacular, it's great. And plus, it's really cool that you all spent the last 2 hours. We think this stuff is really meaningful, and we're grateful that you all think that it is as well. So again, the community shaping and improving, not responding to demand. So again, having that front door approach of everybody's invited. Nope. We're not going to take anybody to the dance for the next 3 years. Or be really mindful of those that we do. So we kind of went over that baseline: Flatirons, Dillon Point, Westlake, Broomfield Town Square. They were again, when we started, we talked about Broomfield Town Square, and the reason it was removed from the agenda last Tuesday was part of that intentional decision making of this council needs to really understand what it is, what the agreement looks like, what we're locked in for, impacts, benefits, to have a very robust conversation about what's next. So that pulling that was kind of parcel and parcel to this is what it looks like as we move forward, much more intentional approach. Again, right development, right time, and the focus is commercial. So let me also be clear, we're not saying we're going to bring a bunch of FedExes in. I don't want the whole community freaking out about that. We're also saying along the lines of how we are going to approach where we are, budget, finances, revenues, resources, and allocations. Same surgical approach will come from the commercial. Because again, I don't want to have an expedited staff approach to get it through quickly to get a no, right? That wastes everybody's time. So staff being in alignment with our city council of what it is and where, and then again, hyper competitiveness, right? So not one to wait for somebody to come in the door, we'll get them. See something that is and it checks those boxes of community added value, we'll find them. That's the challenging piece right now. So again, if we don't modify, bringing someone in to have a slow process or to get to know is not the goal, right? And we may get to know. So we're not on the front end saying, hey, you're guaranteed that you're gonna get this through. We just have to be able to shift it to where it is the likelihood of fitting into that development matrix and the timing and the delivery and what it is from an added value perspective. Those are the boxes that I'm talking about checking. Current development review process, 10 to 13 weeks. For those that haven't been through the development process, it's a long time. Based on the number of units that are coming on, we're looking at an additional 3 weeks. And that's where the creative planning about the developers having a third party to do plumbing and electrical, our staff doing a piece of it, and also contracting out an additional, because we know this spike is here. We don't want to hire an FTE only to have 24 months of kind of head banging, and then it drops significantly. So next slide, please. So residential development impact. There was, so you can see the, and this number's been refined as they always are since March, right? In the pipeline, having the definition of being in the pipeline didn't mean approved. So what I want to see in order to have data-driven decisions is the categories. What is in the pipeline, what has been approved, what can we get in front of? So what's coming to council in the next 4 months while we move through these council discussions on the what's next. Not saying that one, we're not putting a chokehold on it, but again, understanding where everything is from a cadence perspective. So then we can it's not turning the light switch on. We have to figure out what that looks like. We do know that the 13% population increase is accurate. Next slide, please. And again, the commercial, for anybody that's been in development, developers won't develop when we say we need a grocery store. We need a bakery. We need a little coffee shop. Developers won't come and develop if there's not an existing base of customers. So it's that catch-22. So you build all the residentials based on the commercial developers saying, as soon as I get to this number, I'm going to be able, from a market perspective, bring the commercial in. Well, then you get COVID. And then you get the internet. And then again, so then you wind up with all of these homes and not being able to deliver on the commercial. So again, the approach is for the next 3 years, you have to take control of what we don't have control of and have that latitude for risk significantly reduced. We went over this slide here. Next slide, please. So these are the affordable slide. Jeff, just based on time, I'm just gonna. So if we have to build a unit, you can see the difference in cost. So what we have to pay for is $45,000 to $70,000 per unit. If it's built into the development, $25,000 to $30,000 per unit. So inclusionary housing ordinance, important place to start, and then you have to adapt. Kind of back to the conversation I was having with Rick earlier, a more strategic approach about what's the target. So if nobody has a target, then it's kind of that wide range, right? We have to be able to target what that approach looks like. And it's not like any other, it's not unlike any other residential. Residential costs money, period. Doesn't matter whether it's market rate or affordable. Next slide, please. Yeah, we kind of giggled when we were going through this again, when I had it's an exciting time to be a Brookfield. So the team that we have put together, none of us will have a professional opportunity to do what we are about to do, and have been doing, quite frankly. So, and that's what I mean by exciting, in that, to really impact at a deep level what the next 10 years looks like, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. There's no place that most of us would rather be. So you can, yeah, so there you go. Big lofty goals. Questions? Okay, I'm going to take the some of the ones that we got online. We answered. I tried to build in as many as I could. Annual revenue is flat. How do you intend to bring the budget into balance? We have to balance. I think the presentation was based on that. Public Works provides water and sewer, critical standard of living, yes. Keep us alive, yes. Providing, maintaining streets. Let's see. Let's see. I'm going over these because we've answered a lot of this in the presentation. I'm trying to find one that is one that we didn't cover. How is it possible that Brookfield goes from years of operating in the black to now operating in the red? What can you do to cut in order to balance the budget? I think we've covered that. What do you mean by reactive and proactive? I think we covered that. Why did the philosophical change occur? I'm hoping that the presentation in the slide indicates the why. Platinum services. Is this really an added value to the community? Why do we need this level of services? It's community driven, of course. Subsidized housing, again, from a priority, is it a priority? And what does it cost? I think we covered a little bit of that about a more strategic approach to overall residential. If we've seen this trend coming and failed to cut or reduce services to ensure we would not need a philosophical change. Our money seems to be mismanaged constantly. I don't know what to say about the mismanagement, and the trend coming is exactly why we're doing what we're doing. So again, 10 years in the making in order to create the trend. We don't want any more items to exacerbate that. And I think we covered a lot of that in the focusing. You need to be focusing more on commercial to close the gap. Most definitely, we completely agree. We talked a little bit about how we plan on making that happen. Why are we paying RTD? All they want to do is cut our services. They failed to bring us promised projects. They're a terrible partner. You should fire them. They're not our partner. If they were staff, it'd be a completely different conversation. Let's see. When will council begin holding public forums in public again? I don't know what that. They're back in and have been. in my email, for those that are online, it's jhoffman@broomfield.org. So if we didn't cover something or you want additional, my grandpa always said, you teach best what you need to learn the most. And so every time we have these conversations, it reinforces and really does help us hone not just the message, but the level of importance of what we're walking into. Person says that why should staff have to give council fiscal sustainability, and how come we haven't had this practice in place already? So if I've been your city manager for 5 years, this would probably also be a different conversation, right? Because then I would own a lot of this, and so now it's on record, and holding myself accountable there. There isn't anything more important to me. Let's see. Not really a cliff. That we're on again, the precipice and seeing it. I'm sorry, you guys. Again, I want to be mindful of time. There's a bunch of bike questions, bikeability, that we will. Will respond to. Let's see. We were supposed to eliminate duplicate services when we became a city and county. That was achieved until recently when expenses have grown exponentially. How does the new budgeting allow for better control? And let's see. It would seem that controlling expenses versus budgeting on revenue. So again, it's the budgeting based on revenue or based on expenses. And I think we've covered that pretty clearly, that when you base a budget on what you're spending, you continue to spend, versus on focusing on that finite pot of money and prioritizing what needs to come out of that. So again, it's a lot of folks talk about zero-based budgeting. I know that for some that is the ideal, and it's a fundamental nature. Zero-based budgeting has, when we looked at the rollovers from the departments, when you have zero-based budgeting, it influences spending. So if you come to the end of the year and your budget is going to go to zero, the likelihood of you saying, what are we going to spend? How can we spend this? Right? So that we don't lose it. That's incentivizing spending based on an artificial set that if you don't spend, you lose. And it accelerates the urgency with which to spend. So the shift, not only from a community perspective, but from an internal perspective as well. And so again, they've always been doing it this way. If you need something, the process that we go through is intense. And again, the one-offs of, I need this FTE, and I need this FTE, and I need this program, and I need this project, much like the 27 average amendments that folks brought to council annually. We're not doing it internally either. So the thoughtful, intentional approach needs to be evaluated on your end being the department's end, and consistently having a amount of funds that then either roll or you base your budget on your last budget. That also does not lead to intentional decision-making. If you have an employee that leaves, immediately hiring for that versus should we repurpose it? Does the job look the same? What is the skill set that we need under this new environment? By having a budget and a process internally for our departments as well that say intentional decision-making requires you to be intentional when you're making those decisions. So it's less about a mother may I, and it's more about the approach to be able to have library work with public health that works with the public environment, that works with our foresters on, instead of replacing one person in public health, the group gets together to be able to say, hey, we got this FTE. How do we repurpose to touch each one of our departments instead of having that siloed approach? So the other, that's again, another shift internally for folks that have been here for a really long time, that are not accustomed to saying, I'm not going to pad my budget. So there's no padding of the budget. You need to ask for what you need and have a separate category for wants. So again, having the capability to, and staff is well aware about the scrutiny through which every decision will pass through. And I think how do you reconcile where we are? Taxpaying citizen, very satisfied. I feel strongly budgetary pressure every year, and I have to live within the means. So basing budget where the increases need to be justified continuously. Couldn't agree more. Again, more conversation about switching from budgeting based on what we spend versus what we have coming in. So I think we've kind of beat that horse. What immediate recourse? I think we went over that. Yeah, I think we covered we covered the remaining pieces, and those again on the bike and the more detailed information about the per mile public works. Asking taxpayers to pay more, especially in uncertain times, doesn't seem like an option. I hope you take this into account. Absolutely, yes. Did you all have dinner? Yes.
Sorry.
I've gone through your annual budgets, gone through the CAFRs. And for you guys that do this every day, it's probably plain as day, right? It is complex, it's very complex. And it would really help people in the community if you could take like this slide and just put a dollar amount to it and some more details. What is mental health? What is enhanced programs? What does that entail? What's environmental sustainability? What does that entail? That would help us when you come to the table and you want input from the community.
That's completely fair. Yes.
I think to go along with that.
Yeah.
It would help, some of these things are pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Police and courts, I think everyone has a pretty good idea what that is.
Uh-huh.
But there's some other things in here that I look at this and I see HHS versus Public Works, and HHS, there's more money going to that than Public Works. And I don't know what HHS really means.
Sure.
And having that information, I think would be very helpful to see, what is our our taxes actually going to fund?
You bet. Yep. Yep. All good suggestions. Yeah, Brenda, please.
No, I definitely appreciate that. And this approach, so I would, if you could, at budget@broomfield.org, email any suggestions or tips, because we are welcoming the input from the community. At budget@broomfield.org would be a great way for us to find out what is missing, right? And we recognize it's not simple and straightforward how we budget to our annual statements. And we are looking to revise our budget book. It is 300 pages, well over 300.
Yeah,
Yeah, coming into it. So I recognize that, and we are working, but it's not going to happen overnight. So one of the things we want to do is take a phased approach of what's meaningful and important to the community, and what's going to, because we want to be transparent and make sure that folks are understanding what we're trying to accomplish here. And so in order to do that, we welcome feedback. So I would recommend just emailing budget@broomfield.org. A great suggestion.
Yes.
So I think you've made it very clear about how the future development of the field, how it needs to be handled better than it has been in the past.
Well,
You know,
just differently, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and done intentionally.
Yeah.
And I think I get what you're talking about when you say this, repurpose or reprioritizing versus reallocating.
Yes.
In a way, it's almost a distinction without a difference or difference without a distinction. You're still making decisions, priority decisions on what gets funded and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Can you go into a little more about how that is going to change when it comes to city council meetings and when council members make proposals and what they will be held to as far as how things get funded and how decisions get actually made?
Okay, so let me be really clear about this. Okay. Staff, I don't hold them to anything, right? The community does.
Sure, correct. But you do set the ground rules for this is going to cost this much if you
Yeah.
do this. This is going to cost this much if you do this.
I
How
provide
does
the,
that get provided?
I provide the, it's exactly, again, we've got to get to the point of those line items, right? And being transparent about what those decisions are, even if it's at the 50,000 foot view, right? So our role on staff is to have memos that are meaningful and not 47 pages of what, right?
So attaching dollar amounts to proposals.
Well, the majority of them have it now, and even more than that, because all of the memos that we have right now, when there's a fiscal impact, we have here's what the fiscal impact is, and it's funded or not funded. That's not enough.
What gets taken out?
Well,
Right, I mean, that's the part that's missing.
yes. Well, again, it's the cumulative effect, right? So overall, a long-range financial plan, and Brandon and I, we've talked a lot about how to have that meaningful information that even if the community doesn't know to ask it, doesn't mean that we shouldn't say it more clearly, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go on record and say every single thing is going to have a dollar amount, right? But that cumulative impact of what it is, not only will there be a dollar amount, but there'll be whether it's text or data along with that, what that cumulative effect is. So in the past, we've always said, okay, so if you convert commercial to residential, here's the math that we do. And it's going to impact the long-range financial plan $1.3 million. And, right, what is that cumulative effect? So now are we at decision number 8 and it's $19 million? So if we don't provide that cumulative sight, right, then the data-driven decisions and intentional decision-making really is for naught, because then you get back to that project by project. This one project impacts X. This one, X. This one, X. Again, we need to go before that to be able to say, in the next 12 months, we are committed to no transfers, right? And so again, you have to be able to have some finite piece in there from a restricted standpoint to have measurements, right? To have output. How well are we doing with the 50-50, right? The 50% new infrastructure, 50% shoring it up. How do we track that? We only track that if on the front end, we can hit the reset to be able to say, this is what it looks like moving forward. And then that's the KIPs, right? Those are the measurable outcomes for each one of the decision packages. Does that answer the question?
Mostly,
Kind of?
Yeah.
A work in progress.
right, and we'll see it roll out in the next few months, right? Start with you.
Yeah, well, no, you will. I mean, again, it's the, April budget amendment is big. Going into May with the residential, June with the commercial, July with the debt conversation, the rate study information, and integrating, kind of the what comes next. Many? You know where to find me. Anything else? So, Jay Yamash is here too, if for, the assessor for any like property tax information or assessed valuation or any of that kind of stuff. Brenda Ritchie, CFO, Jeff Romine, Thunder Romine, jack of all trades. Yeah, we'll hang around for a little bit. Just to any offline conversations. Thanks, we sure appreciate it.